Hello Year 10 and welcome to this short video which is designed to give you feedback on population test 1 that you've just sat, which was population theory. Okay, I've deliberately put it on pieces of paper this time so that you don't have to look at my face whilst we're going through some of the different feedback for the exam. Okay, right, just to kick off, the first question, you had a graph of the demographic transition model and it basically just asked you what stage it was in, and I would say 99% of people were absolutely spot on when they started to write what stage it was. It was stage 1 of the demographic transition model. I've also put on there high fluctuating. It's also called the high fluctuating stage, and you could have got a mark for putting that as well because both the birth rate and the death rate are very, very high, and it fluctuates, so it goes up and down depending on famines and good and bad harvests. In terms of stage 1 of the demographic transition model, these days there aren't really any countries that are still stuck in stage 1 because the medical advances have already been made, and charities are delivering lots of those medical advances, which means that even really sort of the poorest of LEDCs, even if they're only at the beginning of it, they're moving into stage 2 of the model. Second question that you had to do, it said to explain why the rate of natural increase in LEDCs such as Indonesia is falling. Now when you were answering this question, a lot of you made some silly mistakes, and the reason why you made silly mistakes was not that your geography was bad, it was just that you weren't reading the question properly. Now I've told you when we've been going through these that you need to make sure that you're boxing lots of the command words. Okay, so I've got command words written down there. Now if we read through this question really carefully, we can see that it says explain, so we know we need to explain our reasons why. Okay, but it kind of tries to trick you, this question, because it says explain why the rate of natural increase is falling. Okay, and that's a little bit confusing because it's talking about things increasing and it's also talking about things falling. Okay, so if we look at the question properly, what it's actually asking you is it's asking you why the rate of natural increase is going down, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the population is falling. Okay, there's still population increase. So what the question is basically wanting you to do is it's wanting you to explain what happens in stage 2 of the demographic transition model. What is it that happens that causes the death rate to start to fall, okay, and the birth rate to start to fall. So you're looking at things like advances in medicine, but you're also looking at things like availability of contraception, and all those things would have got you the marks when you were answering this question. Okay, now when you were answering this question, you really needed to get to grips with some of the marking criteria. So I've put level 1, level 2, level 3 because you hear me banging on about these quite a lot in lessons at the moment. If you put falling not rising, or if you put that it was falling because more people are using contraception, okay, and it was a simple sentence like that, while that is good geography and you're not wrong, it's only a basic response. Okay, so you could only get a maximum of 2 marks. Now what we need to start doing a lot more is being able to link our statements. So I've put on there level 2 and it says clear link statements. Now those of you that have me for RE as well will know that I bang on about so what an awful lot, but you need to make sure that you're using link statements such as therefore, this means that, because of this, because that allows you to think about the knock-on effect or the multiplier effect and to be able to go into a lot more detail. So for example, you might say that birth rates are falling because women are becoming more educated, therefore they're going out there and they're getting careers. This means that they become more materialistic and they're more aware of contraception, and because of this they have less children. Okay, and that's what you need to start doing in order to make sure that you're getting level 2, level 3 responses and answers for those small questions. Okay, the next one, it was talking about the features of stage 4 and 5 of a population pyramid. Okay, so you had the population pyramid that was in front of you, and on that population pyramid you had to describe or explain, describe what some of the main features of it were. Now in terms of this question, people did generally okay, but people weren't using enough of the key words. Okay, now these geography words or these key words are really important, and you need to make sure that you're using them all the way through every single answer that you're doing in the exam. So don't just put old people, put old dependents. Don't just put young people, don't just talk about the middle-aged, talk about the economically active. Okay, you know the geography, you know your stuff, and it's up to you to be able to show what you know off to the examiner. Okay, now with this question, lots of people went into far too much detail. The question just asked you what features were there of the population pyramid. So you would be talking about the life expectancy, the birth rate, the death rate. You'd be talking about the fact that it's got an ageing population because there's a higher proportion of old dependents, young dependents. What you didn't need to do was to explain why, okay? And lots of you wasted a lot of time, although you didn't lose marks for it, explaining why the features of that population pyramid were like that. Okay, now maybe perhaps that's partly my fault because I've been trying to get you to explain what it is that population pyramids have shown me. But again, this comes around to boxing the command words and making sure that you're only going into the levels of detail that you need to. Okay, so just be wary of that. Although most of you didn't lose marks, it might mean that you lose time when it comes to those longer answer questions. Okay, now this next question said that you basically needed to explain the factors that affect population growth, and you had a choice of 3 different things that you could pick from. Now the 2 easiest things to pick from, in my opinion, were changes to farming, okay, and education for women. And most of you picked these 2 options. So you either picked changes to farming or you picked education for women, which is fantastic. Now when we're talking about changes to farming, we're talking about mechanisation. So basically no longer do they do farming by hand. They now use tractors and lots of modern technologies in order to make sure that they can produce as many crops as possible. Now obviously with that means that less people are needed in order to farm the land, which might mean that birth rates will fall because less people are needed and less people are required to work. Okay, education for women, we talked about this quite a lot in the past. We talked about education for women, which means that they've got more access or more knowledge of contraception. They might gain careers and jobs, their role, and they might become more empowered, which means that birth rates will start to fall. And most of you kind of got that, and you're getting the hang of it. Okay, but what you're not doing again is linking your statements. So where I just said earlier about using phrases like therefore, this means that, because of this, okay, that's what you really need to do. So you could say there have been many changes in farming and they're now mechanising and using lots of tractors. This means that less workers are needed and required on the land. Therefore, the birth rate might fall. Okay, and they're the sorts of things that you need to be doing, that you need to be looking at. Okay, so there you go, you've got your therefore and you've got this means that. Okay, now this next question people actually didn't do too well on, okay, and this was using the world map and maps. So I'm going to pop this resource just down in front of you there. You don't need to look at it in much detail, and it's kind of a skewed view of the world, and it's a skewed sort of world map in comparison to the kind of the sort of more typical projection that you're used to. Okay, now in these particular maps you had one map that showed the size of the population and one map that showed the proportion of females that are illiterate, so they can't read and write, and the question asked you to pick up on the links between the 2. Now on these particular maps, the skinnier the fewer, and the fatter the more. Okay, so the fatter the countries on the top map, the higher their annual population growth, and the fatter they are on the bottom map, the higher proportion of those that are illiterate. Okay, now there's an obvious link when we looked at it, and basically where you get higher population growth, we also get a higher proportion of women that are illiterate. Most of you picked up on that, okay, but in order to answer this question properly, you need to use your basic geography, because it's not like any other world map. It doesn't label the countries on there for you. Okay, so you're going to have to pick out some key statistics and some key countries from that map. Now, when you were marked for this, if you said that population growth rate is high, literacy rate is also high, then you can only pick up 1 or 2 marks. Okay, if you started to give proper locations and you started to use the maps and you said, for example, in China there is a high proportion of population growth and there is also a high proportion of people that can't read and write, whereas in most of Western Europe most people can read and write and there is a low population growth. So you need to make sure that you're aware of these. Now, on the higher paper question, this was the big 8-mark question at the end, and it says explain the problems that LEDCs face due to rapid population growth for 8 marks. Now, actually, on the whole, people's knowledge and understanding for this question was really, really good. But again, it comes down to the mark scheme. Okay, level 1, basic statements. Okay, so some of the problems of having rapid population growth are that people might struggle for resources. That's simple. Or people might struggle for food. Okay. For level 2, you need to link your ideas together. So we've got this idea of desertification. So if people need more food, then there's more farming, which means that there's overcultivation and overgrazing. Because of this, this means that we start to see soil erosion and eventually we get desertification. Now, to get level 3, to get yourself those 7 and 8 marks, you need to use specifics. And I've talked about level 3 information an awful lot, and that's where your case study of the Gambia will come in. Okay. Now, lots of you talked about it, but it didn't really show me that you knew much about about it. If you can remember the birth rate of the Gambia, if you can remember the percentage of land that's been used for farming, okay, that's going to get you marks, and that's going to pick you up marks. So unfortunately, it's a case of being able to memorise some key facts. Okay, homework is to redo that question that was on the Gambia. Okay, so to redo the question, explain the problems that LEDCs face with rapid population growth for 8 marks, and I really want you to think about this mark scheme. Basic, linked ideas with specifics. Then when we come back to next lesson, we'll do a bit of peer assessment.